Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to be talking to my very good friend and trainer, Rich O'Neill. Rich is a lifelong fitness adventurer, and he's also the founder of Elite Functional Performance here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Rich has an amazing story of all sorts of adventures that ultimately led him to a mountain biking accident years ago that changed the course of his life. I'm excited for Rich to share his story and how that accident ultimately led him to helping people like myself to physically prepare for adventures through what he calls fitness longevity. Rich has done so much for me personally to help me with some back pain issues that ultimately got me back to where I was doing the adventures that I was able to do. And so I'm super excited to share his story with you and some of his guidance on fitness longevity. So Rich, welcome to the campfire, my friend.
Thank you, Scott. This is awesome, man. I'm really psyched to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So you have such a cool background and such a cool story of kind of where you lived and sort of the progression of how you ended up in Charlotte, North Carolina. But can we just go right back to kind of the beginning of your story and where you're from and kind of how you traveled around?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born in Bronxville, New York. Lived downstate New York my entire life. I guess it really started before all that. My mother was born in Germany, so I've got very deep European roots. Got some Irish in there. You can tell by the last name as well.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like a mix of the classic European kind of, what you find these days over in that area in New York.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that served as sort of a backdrop for a lot of how my introduction came about into what I call the physical culture. I remember doing things slightly unorthodox growing up as it pertained to how my mom would treat colds and various things like that, being from a European background. And so I was always thankful to have a little bit of a more, I guess, different experience as it pertained to some of those things. But right away, I realized that, there was a lot of different stuff going on. And so living in an area like New York, it was pretty, you got to taste everything.
Yeah.
And so, before you know it, I'm getting ready to finish up high school in North Jersey and had an opportunity to get to a small state school in southern Vermont for a couple years. And that was really my first experience of moving from a really urbanized metropolitan area like New York, heavily densely populated, kind of a classic, like, what it's like to live in an urban area,
Right.
to a very secluded part of the country that some people never get to go to, and exploring other parts that I've never been to within that state, within that region. Really just kind of like the curtain lifted for me. And I realized that there was something beyond what this melting pot that I was raised in and around. Culturally, there was so much for me to absorb in the area that I was, where I grew up and how I grew up and when I grew up. But all of a sudden, I realized that there was a lot more to see and experience. And adventures were going to be what really, cataloged my experience through memories, and things like that. And so it was a turning point for me to grow up in a very specific area and have a very specific, kind of like things are in a very immigrant based neighborhood, and with, first and second generation immigrants all over the place. Things look very, very standardized. And
Right.
so for me to leave that environment and go explore southern Vermont and the whole Northeast Kingdom and different crazy parts of New England I'd never been to, and Montreal, all of a sudden I was like, man, I kind of don't want to go back to New York.
Right. So something that kind of a switch flipped in you, and actually it's funny because we were talking this morning, and you said that kind of a time came where you were just ready to kind of move away from where you were, and there was something that involved a coin toss here that
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really, that experience for me to um, go up to Vermont and have a couple years of school up there and just have a lot of fun and see different things. After a couple years up there, I ended up transferring down to Long Island and finishing college out at Stony Brook University.
yeah.
It was just, cheaper with in-state tuition and all that kind of stuff. And so, being back in New York and finishing school and getting right into like the job scene and back in that world, I was like, man, I really, really missed Vermont. And so it was really interesting because I, was working at a couple different jobs and, right out of school. And a buddy of mine had landed me a gig in a complex across the street from where I went to high school was a vitamin store. And he had known the owner and he had worked there on and off through high school and, asked me to pick up a couple shifts for him because he was leaving town. And I ended up getting into it. And, I remember my German grandma telling me about like, you know, various things involving nutritional herbs and how you
Yeah.
rub stuff on your chest when you have a cold. And now I'm sitting in this vitamin store, working and reading some of this stuff and starting to connect some dots. And I was like,
Right.
ah, this is actually pretty cool. So I
Yeah.
started to transition, into the physical culture through my experience working in like a small mom and pop vitamin store in North Jersey, Bergen County. Um, that really started to get, I mean, I was working almost full time in that environment, learning the natural grocery side of things, learning the supplement nutrition side of things. Decided to go for a nutrition certification through the American Dietetic Association. Um, as everything ended up turning out, I was trying to get into graduate school. I ended up getting a job offer from Whole Foods Market out in
Nice.
Boulder, Colorado.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
so, I had now an experience where I'm working in New York thinking, okay, this is going to maybe turn into something cool. And now all of a sudden there's an opportunity for me out west, but I still had this yearning for like wanting to go back to Vermont for some reason this couple of years up there really
Right.
did it for me as far as lifting the curtain for me to see that there was more out there than what I had known up to that point in my life. And so, I was like, all right, there's bigger opportunities out there for me. And I was going to either, go up and take a job at Killington Ski Resort in Rutland, Vermont, and catch lifts for a few seasons and probably be a pretty awesome snowboarder.
Good life
Um,
up there.
yeah, rock
Yeah.
my mountain bike in the summer, and
Yep.
do that. Or I was going to take this nutrition thing to the next level. And so I moved out to Whole Foods Market or with Whole Foods Market to Boulder and began my career out there. And that was April of 1999.
So the coin toss was, do we go to Vermont or do we go to Boulder, Colorado?
Yeah, that was it. I was having a tough time deciding, and my dad was just like, "Why don't you just flip a coin? Because you only got two choices, and you seem to be cool with each one, but you're struggling on where to land. So
Right.
flip a damn coin. That always works." And sure enough, Boulder, Colorado is where it began. My true transition into the physical culture through the portal of nutrition and supplementation. And so that was kind of the jump off point for me to now start going full time into that world. Learning more about the implementation of nutritional herbs with food, with other holistic practices to create wellness for people on a very intrinsic level. And so that was just flip the coin and see where you land.
Flip the coin and see where we land. So here's what I love about Rich O'Neill, because kind of this, macho Bronx tough guy that goes out to Colorado and becomes a hippie. And, now we got the best of both worlds. I mean, it's,
Talk
it's
about two sides of a coin.
that's exactly right. But it's pretty awesome. So Rich, so you moved out to Colorado, you start working at Whole Foods, and I mean,
Mhm.
man, the adventures that you can have in Colorado. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was very eye-opening. I had been into mountain biking up through the Catskills and parts of New York that weren't far from where I was living. Got up in the areas I was familiar with in Vermont, um, and up through some other areas in New England, and thought I knew big mountain riding.
Yeah.
And then I went to the Rockies and realized I hadn't experienced anything relatively close to any of that.
Yeah. Totally
So I
different.
was geographically altered in my perspective.
Mhm.
And you just had to basically start from square one and test your limits and see where your comfort zone was. But I really enjoyed the adventures as far as being able to do everything from mountain biking and snowboarding on the same day, depending on what season it was, to snowshoeing and different things I had never done before. Adventures outdoors with animals, doing cool stuff, and just the ability to explore into open space. I was really thankful to land in Boulder County, where they've just from day one have done a fantastic job. Really sectorizing certain areas for open space
Yeah.
and just allowing community members to go enjoy some of the most gorgeous, well kept areas that you'll find anywhere around there. So from an adventure standpoint, every day was something new for me. I'd look at my schedule at Whole Foods a week ahead of time and be like, man, I hope it's not raining Wednesday and Sunday because I want to get out and do something cool. Those are my days
That's
off next
right.
week.
That's right.
And so, yeah, it was really awesome to be able to
Yeah.
be in an environment that supported that. And really, I was just there to go.
That for sure. And so mountain biking became a pretty big thing for you out there. Just let's talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was the easiest way for me to, get my next adventure, so to speak. Like, I came through a very heavy background of BMXing, BMX racing, freestyle dirt jumping. Again, where I grew up, when I grew up, it was, these pre-X Games type activities
Yeah.
where, we'd build a mound of dirt and start launching ourselves without pads or helmets upside down and around and about. And, sometimes you land rubber side down and sometimes you don't. But, my background had always been very prolific on a bicycle and I enjoyed it and did very well as far as some of the trick stuff and whatnot. So mountain biking was a natural, fit. It seemed a lot easier to do certain things with bigger wheels and
Mhm.
shocks and, absorption factors that were never there on those little 20-inch steel BMX bikes that you remember growing up with. And so
Yep.
um, I really got into the racing aspect and got really into the, let me get in shape here, training in the altitude kind of thing. And it really took a hold of me when I first got out there. Cause again, I mean, I could go to these ski resorts that were, hosting races in the off season from snow and really experience, lots of new adventures that were just way out of my relative comfort zone, but also just things I had never even thought were out there. So it was really, really cool to get into the mountain bike side of things. Cool thing about working at a store like Whole Foods Market was you had a lot of people from different areas of Boulder County all coming to that store to work. So I mean, I had
Mhm.
buddies that were in the produce department that would live in some of the towns that I would love going mountain biking in. So we'd make plans on days off to connect up in their hood, and they'd show me a
Yeah.
bunch of like awesome secret trails that were built like out of these old, U.S. Forest Service roads that got retired in the '70s, and some guys get out there with some chainsaws and build like a few miles of single track, and it's like epic, but nobody knows about it. And
Right.
now I can go up there and mountain bike. Like it was sick
Right.
making some of those connections and literally adventures that you wouldn't even expect, but um, you can cultivate that through an environment like that. And that's really the mountain bike community really drew me in.
Yeah, and the way that you were biking out there, this wasn't just kind of casually riding around trails in the woods. I mean, you were on some pretty you're first of all in Colorado, 14ers out there and
Yeah.
and you're on a mountain bike and there's some speed involved. Let's talk about some of the danger and then let's talk about what happened.
Yeah. I mean, you'd like to go fast. And again, not being familiar with a lot of the big mountain situations. I'd never seen boulders getting spit out of people's back tires um, that come at you looking at like the size of a
Right.
basketball. And you got to either do some quick reactive stuff or you're gonna end up rubber side up and that's never
Yep.
good.
Yeah.
And so doing a race one time in Winter Park, Colorado, 2001, doing pretty good, and saw a racer in front of me go down and spit a rock out, and I wasn't able to get out of the way in time. Turned the bars, crashed into that. And at the time I had already broken my right hand 3 times and my left wrist once in
Mm.
some form of accident associated with putting my hands out in front of me falling on bikes over the course of my life. So I remember that distinct moment being like, don't put your hands out, dummy. This is going to be a bad
Right.
one. So I decided to kind of like take it in the shoulder, the same
Okay.
shoulder I had broken a collarbone on the summer before I started high school.
Yep.
in a parking lot BMX accident like an idiot. So that same broken right collarbone was now going to absorb all the force going downhill, flying. Yeah, so I tore my shoulder up pretty good. Didn't break anything, thankfully. Um, but the injury was severe enough that I landed myself as a patient in North Boulder Physical Therapy Clinic, and Whole Foods was picking up the tab. So you better believe I was in there 3 days a week doing all my homework, doing my
Hmm.
sessions,
Yep.
and really trying to rehab a, you know, partially torn rotator cuff. There was some, damage at the supraspinatus and infraspinatus, which are the muscles that would be responsible, say, for reaching back to grab the seatbelt in your vehicle,
Okay.
that external rotation of the shoulder. Um, so that means the actions of things like, washing your hair, brushing your teeth, rotating the arm in that action, um, on my right shoulder, my dominant arm, that was problematic. And it was a slow return after an accident like that because of the heavy compression and impact. There was an AC sprain, of the ligaments in the acromion clavicular joint there, from the impact. And so, you got some tendon damage, you got some ligament damage, you got some muscular damage.
Yeah.
Thankfully, you didn't break any bones. So, I'm
Yeah.
sitting in there and doing my exercises and everything's going. And, you know, here we are rehabbing now,
So
and that
the
was
so
it.
the accident, what did it do to what did it mean for your love of mountain biking and your the path you were on in terms of mountain biking?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes you start realizing that, there's different levels, of competition involved with
Mhm.
sports like that. Things like dual slalom, downhill, a lot of the slope style, high risk park events, um, are they carry with it a certain risk to reward ratio that, um, I think I fit better now into the standard cross country, um, kind of classic fit as
Sure.
far as what those
Sure.
courses and
Well,
tracks look like, and you grind it out there. You realize, like, I can distinctly remember that morning, after the wreck, and I'm in the sling, and I was able to unvelcro it so that I could just at least get my arm to move a little bit at the elbow. And my alarm goes off the next morning. So I'm laying in bed and I was like, let me just see if I could like do anything with this arm. And I tried to like do something like external rotation to try and like roll and hit
yep.
the alarm. And I couldn't get any movement at all. So I mean, in that moment that I was so terrified thinking I had done severe damage. This is the morning after. I hadn't had any pictures yet. I'm like, something, it doesn't work at all. And I'm trying. And so that moment that like I was terrified that like, man, did I like is my arm shut off? What's the deal here? It's definitely bad. First thing I could think of was to go to the Whole Foods and get one of the massage girls at the,
Yep.
little face down massage chair area to start rubbing on that thing. That was a bad idea, because it was pretty angry. And then girl gets in there with the thumb and finds an old trigger point, from throwing baseballs or something, and wham! Now it's really angry. And yeah, so I mean, it was terrifying in that moment. And then you start to realize, like, I love this sport, but I don't need to have these type of, near death experiences in order
Right.
to get what I need from that sport. So a
Right.
lot of times the injuries put the brakes on for you, because
Right.
I wasn't that good at putting the brakes on myself when I was going downhill on a bike. And so, the speed works right up until the point that there's a wreck that says back off a little bit.
Yeah, well, sometimes life shows us what we need to be doing, right? It just if we can't figure it out on our own, but couple of
Yeah.
hands, a wrist, you said, a shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah.
But clearly you did learn your lesson because now you've got people that are just like you coming in to see you. So
Yeah.
so how does this story kind of round out in terms of like next steps in Colorado and how you ended up here in Charlotte and how Elite Functional Performance was born?
So it was interesting, I'm sitting in there working at Whole Foods, figuring, hey, this thing is going great. I'm working in the what I consider the premier department
Mhm.
of the store, vitamins and health and beauty aids, and we had a great team and I'm loving it. And I'm like, man, I'm going to grow with this company, and I'm rehabbing my shoulder. Here we go, and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden I go in and I remember my PT, he was a good dude. We were buddies on LinkedIn. And, he's like, yeah, last session today. And, we're going to wrap everything up. And I'm like, hold up, dude. I can't like take that 2 pound weight from last time and go overhead yet pain free. Like,
Yeah.
where are we at with this? What do you mean last session? He's like, well, it's the last session that is pre-approved. So I'll tell you what the rate is, and you can pay out of pocket if you want, but
Yeah.
this is the last session that's, on your package.
Right.
And when I realized that the out-of-pocket cost was unrealistic, I was like, all right, I'm not done yet with this process. If you were me, how could I learn more about the shoulder? So I asked them to write a couple books down, name of a few books that I could look up or whatever on shoulder, figure out what's going on. And I'm a pretty smart dude. I graduated from college. And so I was like,
There
let
you go.
me see if I can figure this thing out. So I read a few books on shoulder anatomy, and I realized, all right, I've had it wrong most of my life, playing overhead sports and doing things that involve compression and breaking my shoulder. So mechanically, I was so off, and muscularly, I was so out of balance. Once I understood sort of what the structure was made up of and how it looked, I took my Whole Foods YMCA membership and went over to the gym and
Yeah.
kind of made up my own exercise routine. And within about a month, I was damn near out of pain. And within about 6 weeks, man, I was probably the strongest I'd ever been. And so something dawned on me in that moment. And it's funny because the YMCA was like directly behind Whole Foods in Boulder, separated maybe on the
Yeah.
side by like a softball field. And I remember getting out of the gym after I had this epiphany that, like, oh my God, all I was lacking was strength.
Mm-hmm.
I like ran over to Whole Foods and was like telling my buddy, I'm like, I think I figured out the shoulder thing. Like, I got no pain now. This thing's actually working.
Yeah.
And I realized I think I need to start exploring more into the world of movement, fitness, and strength, because I could only imagine there were people in a very similar situation like me that were going to have a, unfavorable outcome from a classic clinical experience. But what do they do? Do they go to the YMCA and start doing push-ups again? Because that might have been what caused their problem.
Yep.
And so I immediately saw that, through my experience in athletics and everything else through high school, college, you name it, I was like, okay, there's a break in the functionality as far as how exercise is typically being taught. We have what I call a beat them till you break them type attitude toward exercise. And then when you're broken, you've got a less than favorable outcome from the clinical experience. I'm like, well, this is obviously why people think that as you get older, things are supposed to hurt and get more broken, is because you broke it on purpose and you don't have anyone to fix it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what if you didn't break it? And when it started to kind of sound weird, you knew how to fix it. So I had this vision in my head of like, all right, what if you did exercise in a way that didn't destroy the body? Or what if you did things with movement that actually taught the body to, flourish within the way it was designed to work? Would that mean that you'd have knee pain at 50, 60, 70 and back pain and all this other stuff? Like, maybe not. And so it kind of got this seed planted in my head. And, I've had some connections through Whole Foods that got me linked up to a local gym, 24-hour fitness. So I got certified for personal training and began my personal training career there in 2003 at
Yeah.
24-hour fitness in Boulder.
Yeah. So this whole thing kind of evolved, and what you practice at Elite Functional Performance is what you call fitness longevity. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, everything was so pivotal for me, that experience at Whole Foods and moving out, my true adventure, moving out of New York to Boulder.
Yeah.
I was working in the nutrition department with a kid who did body work, a really awesome, high level, world class, elite level body worker. And he had hooked up with a guy in Boulder just down the block from our Whole Foods, and he was doing body work at his gym. And here I am now, a new trainer. And we're working the night shift together at Whole Foods, and he's telling me about his bodywork clients and where they're all tight, and I'm telling him about the exercise programs I'm writing for the clients that I have at the gym. And we're really vibing on this whole, like, yeah, we're selling vitamins and slinging supplements all over Boulder, but we're also like both developing this second career as
Yeah.
like hands-on and movement guys. And
Yep.
he kept saying, you got to meet this guy Sam. He's like, your brains are very similar, and that's really well, he kept drilling it, like, you're thinking the same way conceptually, you're seeing the same things being wrong. I hear you saying a lot of what he's saying. And finally, I've driven by the place 1,000 times. It's on a pretty major road in Boulder. So I went in, I met the guy, and what I thought was a casual conversation, I later learned was my formal interview. um, and he was going to allow me to come in and do some personal training. What really made me committed from the beginning to working with Sam. His name's Sam Ionetta. um, committed to working with Sam and being mentored by Sam, was he's describing to me in this conversation slash interview his system of exercise that is, I'm like, I've been thinking this, but you've actually got a system that has simplified this thing down to the raw nuts and bolts of what's required for this lifetime of, quality movement. And he's like the only other guy I met at that point in my life who didn't believe that you have to feel like crap as you get older, or things must degrade and deteriorate in the human body as you age, and that pain and discomfort and limited movement is part of the aging process. He was like, I think it's all BS. And we have an exercise system that's starting to buck the trend and have our grandmas outperforming their grandkids. And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, really? I'm like, I believe that this is a thing. I'm trying to do that at this other gym, but I got like frat boys dropping 100-pound dumbbells all over the place,
Yep.
and kids on the cardio machine trying to sweat out a hangover from the night before, and I'm getting nowhere. And he's like, no, not only is this a thing, like that's the only thing we do here. And I was like, oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Lock me in. And, I stayed locked in, working exclusively for Sam for, almost 11 years.
Yeah, I mean, so in this, I want to get into that just a little bit more because, obviously it's helped me, but so let's just kind of fast forward from Colorado to Charlotte to elite
Sure.
functional performance, and then
Mhm.
we'll kind of get into some more of that, the fitness longevity.
Yeah. So, I mean, I basically, had been mentoring under Sam, again, over 10 years, really had a strong hold on the system at that point. I believe that he'd always drill me to study the body, know your anatomy, this and that. I think at some point, leaving that scene and venturing out on my own was going to be the next step in my own development, as his mentor, as his mentoree. And so, as fate had it, I was never looking, but through a mutual connection of a client that I was training, I got invited to her wedding. I meet a gal there who's a close friend of hers. We hit it off, and she lives in Charlotte. So now comes the choice, right? Do I stay in Boulder and continue this thriving career, or do I chase the woman I just fell in love with and put myself back in the Eastern time zone in a new environment for a new adventure? And,
Nice.
there's the opportunity now for me to have a family. And I felt like I was at the time equipped with a good enough skill set that I could, kind of fly the coop and be out from under Sam's wing and maybe not fail. So Charlotte was the place where I landed. And I knew when I got here, I was like, it's a long shot that I'm going to find what I need here for a job. I mean, I can't go to the local YMCA and do what I do.
Mhm.
You couldn't imagine training the way I do in a place like that. And it's just because our system is a lot less conventional than what you'd experience in a lot of those scenarios. And so it's got to be taught, delivered, and conceptualized very specifically in a very, I think in a very precise way. And so I think in a way, the thought was in my mind at some point upon arriving in Charlotte, like, I'm probably going to have to just start my own gig here because I doubt
Yeah.
anybody's going to have anything close to what Sam had.
Yeah.
And I needed a certain way for me to do what I do.
Yeah.
So that was in a sense the birth of elite functional performance, was me kind of like needing a place to work. And the gym that I had briefly hooked up with when I first got here, was going under, and owner was going to just shut the doors and shut it down. So we bought some of the equipment, found a location, and shortly after I had arrived here and met a group of trainers that I had started to kind of form a community with, a few of the clients, a couple of the people I've been working with, we all decided to just kind of start this thing from scratch. That was 2016.
Yep. Yeah, I
Mhm.
love it. So you said, so now you're in Charlotte, and you said when you were working with Sam, I love that you said grandmas were outperforming their grandkids or something to
Yes,
that effect. So
sure.
what is the underpinning of that? Just for layman listeners, like what's the underpinning of that fitness longevity that helps grandma outperform her grandkids?
Yeah, so it's black and white. It's very simple stuff. Like it's, when people ask me, so what do you do with exercise? I'm like, let's talk about what I don't do. Like we don't believe that flipping tractor tires or swinging sledgehammers is a good way to keep your lower back in shape over the course of a lifetime. Whether you do it right or wrong, whatever, if you didn't do it, you'd probably feel better.
Hmm.
So we've simplified the exercise system to truly what the body needs.
Hmm.
We need to push, we need to pull, we need to squat, we need to twist, we need to do these with correct biomechanical precision. We need to have functional joint range of motion, maybe not precise end range, or what they say in the book is optimal joint range of motion. What makes sense for each person? We know we need functional strength. Try getting through life being weak. That doesn't work for anybody. The door is going to weigh 20 something pounds. You got to push it open. Life has load, and we need stability because we have staircases and we get in and out of vehicles and we raise and lower our center of mass.
Mm-hmm.
So all these different things pertain to needs of the human body from a movement standpoint over a lifetime. And fitness longevity has simplified the exercise piece to a really digestible dosage of things that the human body now receives, everything from triplanar movement, where we're raising and lowering, twisting and moving into the side plane, giving it distractions from the standpoint of how we affect the core, moving in different planes, and with weight, without weight, elastic bands, body weight, and changing up the nervous system response around all these different movements. And so the idea is that when this simplified program gets delivered in an expert manner to a human being, the brain soaks it up and delivers it through the body to produce these life-changing effects, or
Right.
maybe these life-sustaining effects. So you look at somebody who could be in a training program like this for 20 years, they're going to be getting trained incredibly well for 20 years. If you put them up against an 11-year-old, anyone would say, well, that 11-year-old's going to run circles around him.
Right.
I'm like, not in a stability exercise. She's been training with me for 17 years. She'll outperform anybody in that one exercise. So the ability for the body to absorb the concepts, the principles, it really working through this progressive overload concept of how we get people stronger and have them understand how to keep themselves stable.
Yeah.
Like, kids don't learn that yet. Athletes don't learn that. And we're trying to really change things now as far as what the landscape looks like at the younger levels, so that we can all outperform what's supposed to happen as we age.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, like one of the reasons I'm most excited about having you up specifically on this podcast is really our journey together, because,
Yeah.
I came in to see you, I think it's 4 years, might even be coming up on 5, but, I had back pain, and I thought I went from being a runner to back pain where I thought I was never going to run again. And in working with you, we got me back to the point to where I was running. And this past
Sure.
fall, I was able to run in a half marathon and get a personal record. But part of that whole thing was, preparing and being able to, like, some of fitness longevity for me is to be able to go on adventures and to be
Sure.
able to be in good physical condition so that I can go on adventures with my kids. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I went from thinking I was never going to run again to being back to running. Like, that's no problem. Last month, you helped me get ready to be able to go and climb Mount Kilimanjaro, the roof
Yeah.
of Africa, 20,000 feet, the highest point in that continent. And, I feel like we did it together, Rich, and I'm super grateful for that. And I think what I want to, really be able to emphasize with our listeners on this podcast episode is, some of that preparation for adventure. And, I think you and I talk a lot during our sessions about the sedentary lifestyle. And it's funny, when I recapped my climb on Kilimanjaro with my climbing partners, Kendall, who was on that episode, he started the climb with some bad back pain. And I kept reminding him something that you've told me over and over again, and that is motion is the lotion.
Yeah. Yeah, you nailed it.
And so that became kind of the mantra on that climb. But, Kendall started out with back pain, and he finished climbing that mountain feeling great. Can you talk a little bit about, like, the sedentary lifestyle and how what you're doing helps people to prepare for adventure?
Sure. I mean, I think from the perspective of what we've done to ourselves as a society, we've really written a contract with technology that,
Mhm.
in a sense, says, here, take our bodies and do whatever you want with it. Because we are continuing to find ourselves, as technology advances our society, we find ourselves in a seated position more frequently. We find ourselves with devices or something drawing our attention within about 2 feet in front or 2 feet below us. And we find ourselves changing our spinal position into the same flexion based position that we're being told as you age, man, you better stay out of that. That's old man posture. Well, then why are we here starting at 26 at your first desk job after you get out of college, spend 35 years there, and then when you realize you need some exercise, you do sit-ups, and we're constantly just perpetuating this forwardness in our body's
Yeah.
position and our structures.
So for people, we're obviously on video here, you and I can see your body
Yeah,
as you're kind of making these movements. For those people
yeah.
that are listening to the podcast, I mean, you're demonstrating like these curled in, the shoulders are curled in, and everything's kind of collapsed inwards. And
Mhm.
what you're talking about is, we need to get back to this place where we're kind of expanding
Yeah,
it.
talk of, we use terminology like we envision our spine looking like a cashew,
Hmm.
or starting to look like a question mark,
Hmm.
with the roundedness in the upper piece. And so the idea of maintaining a upright spinal position, is paramount. It's the centerpiece for everything we do from a fitness standpoint in the fitness longevity system. Is you must start from a spinal position that is near or at neutral. And neutral then will translate into the ball and socket position at the shoulders, and where we are with the hips and weight distribution side to side, so we can start to correct positions, nearer to neutral before we even start moving. And that prepares the nervous system for the forthcoming movement, and thus regular practices like that prepare the body for adventure.
Hmm.
And so the fitness longevity system and the algorithm in terms of how we think about somebody coming in and they've got some stiffness. And so we first think about taking the tissue through some mobilization tactics and techniques that are going to, help to maybe gear down the nervous system a little bit that's been holding things so tight. Then we look at some, maybe muscles that are opposing that area that's tight that might not have been as active, and we work on activating that. And then we try to integrate everything the way that we would kind of use our bodies in life. And so the algorithm with how we follow this also kind of leads the body into how we prepare for all of our adventures. We do our warm-ups, we do our activation, we get moving. And so that's it, is the sedentary position creates all this compression in the joints, all of this static, just it's junk. I just call it junk. It's just this gunk in the tissue that gets sticky, and there's no blood flow, and the tendons get crispy. And movement is the only thing that starts to circulate blood
Hmm.
and produce, we get synovial fluid going in the joint. That's our joint lubrication. And so, as we start moving, we are starting to grease up the ball and socket and starting to get the joint surfaces gliding a little bit. The muscles are pumping some blood through there. And it's almost like we're lotioning up the body where it was once just kind of stuck like a dried out sponge, sitting behind the desk in a curled forward position, um, needing to get into the right position and get moving. And so the fitness longevity system gives us, everything we need to be able to deliver that.
Yeah. So here's where I want to go. I think, like, what would you say to people that are feeling like they want to go participate in adventures? Maybe they want to go on a backpacking trip. Maybe they want to go climb a mountain. Maybe they're interested in like taking up some new sport. But what the story is that they're telling themselves is, I'm not in good enough shape. I can't do that. Like, what would you say
Hmm.
to people like that? And how might your system help them?
Yeah, I'd say, you know what, you're probably right. Um, you've got to, I never try to make it seem like we know something more than what somebody feels. If
Yeah.
you feel you're not in shape, you're probably not.
Yeah.
Which makes something even as casual as, walking kind of dangerous if we look at the amount of impact that we could be delivering to the ankles, the knees, the hips, the lower back. I always say you can't blow your ACL if you're sitting on the couch, but you can if you get up and you start trying to exercise and you're a mess.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we got to really look at the fact that someone could be a level zero, a true beginner,
Yep.
and we got to make sure that they are led through the protocol the right way. And another beautiful thing about the system, and specifically the way Sam taught it to me, was you don't move to step two until I've seen you with my own eyes own step one. So if we give you some ankle mobility work because your ankles were sprained and they never got rehabbed, and we give you some drills to do, we're not moving on to squats or any more, complex compound movements until I've seen that your ankles are better than what they were. I need to see that with my own eyes. I'm not going to take your word for it. And so, when we implement the program for the people that need specific things and they get their homework done and they make these changes, we can start to kind of guide them through and make sure that there's an appropriate starting point for each person. But if somebody feels like they're not in shape and it's strictly because of, say, their cardio capacity, You know, as better, you know, as well as anybody. If you're starting a new program, you're kind of starting from the beginning
Mhm.
pertaining to everything. Like, in other words, you had a very, you know, a great background as an endurance athlete. And even with your pain, you still maintained activity enough that you came in and you had some cardio. But we worked on, in my program, cardio, strength, flexibility, mobility, power, speed. So you were new to everything as it related to my new system or your experience in my program, your new fitness adventure. And so when somebody comes in and they feel like they're not in shape, we're like, yeah, if you drove here in a car, your hips are probably stiff. If
Mhm.
you sit down for work, your hips and your ankles are probably stiff and your glutes are turned off. Um, you know, when COVID started, all of a sudden, all these desk workers that just were the people I described had an unlimited amount of time to go start. I'm walking 7 miles a day now through my neighborhood. And I'm like, dude, on cement with shoes that are 2 years old? Like, you're going to destroy yourself. And so that was 2020. We saw everybody get out there and start moving.
Yeah.
And by late 2020 into 21, in came all the weird fasciitis stuff that's not typical like what we see. And, you know, tight soleus in people that we never seen before, you know, the calf muscles underneath there, like
Sure.
weird, funky stuff because people just got out and started going. So we really saw very recently what it can look like if we just send people out there into this culture of, you know, I always say we're, you know, it's this coin toss thing, right? Everything to me is like it's this or it's this.
Right.
I feel like we've got one side of the coin that is telling people in the fitness capacity, go out and move often. And then guys like me and Sam are over here on the other side of the coin saying, yeah, we'll get to that. That's the other side of the coin. The other side that we're focusing on is you must move well.
Yeah.
Like we had to teach you how to walk again
We did.
on your first
You
session,
you did,
you
yes.
know, but you walked in. So you, how do you, you know, you clearly know how to walk, but we broke down your biomechanical movement from the beginning with the most functional thing that all humans do if they're uninjured. They walk. And
Yeah.
so we reprogrammed how your body moved, literally reprogrammed it from your brain through every tissue in your body until everything that you were doing was done with biomechanical precision. And we made sure that the areas required to do it with repetition were functionally strong and the joints were mobile. And so when you plug the system in, you can really get anybody anywhere they need to be.
Well, and I can say, I mean, I think just having my own personal experience, this isn't, there were a lot of ahas involved. It wasn't, you know, the learning that you taught me, the lessons that you taught me, it was kind of like, oh, and then it's like, you
Hmm.
know, mentally I get it. And then it was really just about like practicing it and the repetition. So, you know, I think for somebody that like wants to go on an adventure, that there's something that they want to do, but the physical aspect is holding them back. It's not like this has to take, you know, years and years and years and years. You just have to make sure you get the fundamentals down. So, you know, I guess I'd love for you to kind of speak on that in terms of like timeline, specifically for somebody that, you know, might not be going on that adventure because they're worried about the physical aspect.
Yeah, I mean, you're a great example, right? Like you came to me, you had some pretty significant back pain, and you felt that your back pain was going to limit your capacity to ever be a runner again, or to have a decent quality of movement. I said, "Well, man, that's terrible. I'm sorry to hear about your back pain. Tell me about your accident." And you were like, "Well, I didn't really have an accident." And I immediately something goes off in my head when I hear that. Like if I hear somebody tell me that they've got pain, but there was no impact, you know, Sam would always say that, you know, your program has to be, you know, our tagline would say when knowledge and experience meet common sense,
Mhm.
because there's this common sense thing that is incorporated with everything that we do that should be the driving force behind a lot of the decisions we make and conclusions we come to. So here I am hearing somebody tell me about pain, significant pain in their back, and I'm waiting to hear a story about, yeah, I fell off the ladder taking down the Christmas lights, or, you know, I got hit, you know, I fell off a motorcycle. It was going 35 miles an hour. But in the absence of impact, when something hurts, there's usually some dots that we can start to connect that are going to lead us to a more solution based outcome than just trying to get relief for the pain. So what I mean by that is if somebody were to come in and say I have back pain, and it turns out that that person is, you know, super tall, say 6'5" or higher, and they sit for 50 hours a week at a desk, and that desk chair is meant for guys in my height range at about 5'10", then that guy's going to be jammed up at his desk for a long time, and his hips are going to be stiff and his spine is going to be rounded forward, and he doesn't fit. If he likes to travel, he's likely going to be jammed up in an airplane seat. I mean, I'm barely, 100 and nothing pounds, 5 foot nothing, and I feel like my shoulders are too wide for an airplane seat. I couldn't
Mhm.
imagine being over 6 foot, like these guys get jammed up. And so if that person comes in with back pain, I'm immediately saying, tell me about your accident. Well, there was none. So maybe that guy's back pain is related to stiffness in other joints where some of those muscles in those joints connect in the lower back. I think that was a big aha moment for you. Was like,
It
wait a second,
absolutely was, and I mean,
stiff hips
100%.
could lead to back pain,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
mean, my back pain was not really, I mean, it was because of tight hips, not because of something going on in the back, and that was like you said, I mean, it was a big aha for me, and to be able to figure
Yeah,
out how to stretch my hips has been a huge game changer for me, and that's what's allowed me to do a lot of the things that I've been able to do.
that's
So
right. And so that's kind of the caveat for people as it applies to this timeline, right? Like the fitness longevity system is going to have us take you through some movements in our initial meeting that are going to point out very clearly, do you own this or not?
mhm,
So that means we get the starting point right. And in our non impact pain based people, we're going to find something that needs to get stretched or something that needs to get strengthened or something that needs to get stabilized. And when we can deliver that aha moment pretty early on in the program, we get people to now have a level of buy in that's going to make them very consistent with their stretches and with their exercises and with their correctives and therapeutic strategies. So it's almost like watching this person emerge from this funk of like, man, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do my, you know, adventure because I got this knee thing. Now all of a sudden one day you come out of the gym and you're like, actually, this maniac trainer over there explained to me that it was really an ankle injury on the other side from high school track that never got rehab that led to me leaning too much on the other side and that knee became unstable. So I actually have hope that if I rehab the ankle and unwind some junk on the other side, that I might actually be able to be pretty normal here because he's right. I never really fell off a skateboard or got hit by a car. I never crashed too hard. So nothing should be disrupted in there. So you start to now see somebody feel hopeful, not only about their next potential adventure, but about the prospect of staying consistent with a program. Whereas that person may, because of pain, not have been able to stay in it week after week, month after month as it pertained to an exercise based program. So I can get people to create buy into their consistency with their stretches with that aha moment. And I can get them to start feeling more hopeful for their next adventure with that aha moment. And I can get them to buy into a whole culture of like, let's now build a relationship and create vulnerability that has you going back and examining all pain in your life, emotional, mental, psychological, like physical, and let's find answers for that. And that's an aha moment. And so the fitness longevity system for me, when implemented correctly, serves as a portal for people to not just gain the knowledge of how to move correctly through a lifetime, and not feel pain or
yeah,
obvious discomfort, but correct everything in your life. As you build the strength and you feel better in your physical body, you build the fearlessness to tackle other stuff that's holding you back from adventures, from meaningful relationships, from things like that. So, the timeline really, I think it's fast for people because if all it is some hip stretches and it's not a true disc injury, like in your case, man, you were starting to see pain go down in a couple weeks, whereas you were in pain for a significant amount of months.
yeah.
And so that timeline can be really short if we can nail down for each person. I guess that's my point is if you come in and we just say, oh, well, you look a little chubby, so let's start going with this program, which is designed for fat loss. We might miss the history of that person and the injury story that they have to tell and their movement deficiencies because of old patterns and all these sorts of things. And that's really their starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're always going to be saying, I'd love to go down another notch on the belt, but we can get to that once the program starts getting a little bit like they get the easy winners with your stretches and do the things to give you the relief from the pain. And then the buy-in is there to start layering that with the larger things that are going to create the more long-term effect.
For sure, for sure. And I think, if there's one takeaway, I think I just want people to know that there's hope because sometimes you think, it's, like for me, I thought I was done running, but there was education and things that you taught me. And then there was the practice and the repetition, and there were ahas. And so, there is hope, and that's for sure. I want to ask you, just on an adventure standpoint, if there are people out there that want to go do an adventure, they kind of want to get outside of the routine, and they're feeling, maybe some resistance or some fears and doubts about it. What would be your advice for them in terms of, making it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like this whole thing. Here we are looking at, a sedentary position with the body as something that kind of toxifies our nervous system and toxifies our body's expression of the inherent movement that we're meant to do as people. So if we can pinpoint a position that we shouldn't be in, say stuck in a chair, then let's apply that sedentary concept to someone who's in a phase in life, maybe fearful or hesitant to take that next adventure for reasons involving things on multiple levels. But, it's representative of just being stuck and sedentary. And so, the adventure could be just committing to setting a date for something.
Hmm.
And then the next adventure is seeking out, like you came and found me, through a referral from another
Yep.
close mutual friend of, immense high quality in
Yep.
their work. And so I think adventure by adventure could be measured on a smaller scale in the initial and in the preparation phase that leads to those bigger, more confident steps toward actual larger adventures. But everything could be a winner. And so if we really look at anything sedentary as just toxic, if it's toxic for the body, it's going to be toxic for our human expression, for our humanness. So the adventures have to sometimes be just doing something that pulls us out of our comfort zone today, doing something unconventional, and find another adventure to build off of that tomorrow. But I think it tends to lend more to what perspective we're in, more than what we're really trying to seek ourselves out doing,
Yeah.
or trying to do.
I love it. Well, Rich, this has been awesome. I've got two more questions that I ask everybody that comes on the podcast. So at some
Yeah.
point, they're going to make a movie about your life and fitness, longevity, and all the people that you've helped. But I want to know who the Hollywood actor is going to be that's going to play you in this movie.
Ooh, a Hollywood actor. Man, I think Randy Couture.
Randy Couture. Who's he? What is he in?
Randy Couture is an ex MMA legend who turned
Oh,
into an
okay.
actor. He was in that movie with Sylvester Stallone and The Expendables. He was one of those like big mercenary
Nice.
dudes, big
All
tough
right.
guy. Um, the reason I say that is because as a dude with a shaved head and into the hand-to-hand combat stuff and all that, um, I've been said that that's kind of like my celebrity lookalike
I love it.
over, and he's been in enough movies now that his name's fairly recognizable. But I think what would be interesting is that my life is so unconventional from the standpoint of what I've done athletically,
Yeah.
and movement oriented, that somebody who's basically spent a lifetime in that, combat culture, to pull someone athletically gifted in that world into other things like mountain biking and doing all this other crazy stuff, it would probably be pretty awesome for a dude like that to play me in a movie
I
about my
love
life.
it. I love
you
it.
know,
So
like he'd love that more than I would.
that's super fun. So what's your movie going to be called?
Man, I think it would have to be Pull Back from the Edge.
Ooh.
That's sort of kind of where I'm at right now. I was always kind of thinking about, yeah, where's the edge? I can't see it. Let me push it, push it, push it. And now I realize, like, pulling back from the edge is probably like I need the discipline to gear down
Yeah.
more than I need to put the pedal down and continue pushing forward at a high rate. That's kind of what got me into trouble, but that's sort of what's kept me out of trouble now is, the idea that I can dose my exercise at a less level so that my arm doesn't hurt and I can play competitive baseball as an adult. I can gear down my overall movement in general to make sure I get enough time to recover and sleep so that I can fully repair from all the damage I do. And so gearing down has sort of, pulling back from the very edge has helped me to get more out of what I can do, than continuing to just drive forward and just floor it, which was really fun until you get busted up.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Pull Back from the Edge starring Randy Couture.
That would be awesome.
I
That would
love
be
it.
awesome.
Man, thank you so much
Very
for
cool.
being here today. For the listeners, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Rich's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Rich, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Scott. You're the man. Appreciate it, man.